My name is Rolayo Akhigbe, Senior Vice President of Financial Institution in Nigeria, also a member of Rising Tide Africa. And I'm very happy to be to have this interview with Just Women Africa in collaboration with Rising Tide Africa to tell my story. So I would say the inspiration, I sort of fell into finance. I didn't necessarily wake up saying I was going to go into finance. My background is in economics. I've always been a numbers person, so I had a head for numbers. So I knew whatever I would do would be in the numbers space. I found finance interesting. I found banking interesting. And how I got into banking was shortly after my master's, my MBA. There was a milk run that was done by Citibank in the UK for people who had finished abroad who wanted to come back to their home country, come back to Africa. It was called an Africa Managers Program. And I was interested in coming back to Nigeria. And so there were different opportunities that came. There was Citibank, there was Heineken. And basically I had to choose between two. Those are in terms of the offers that I got from that particular program. And I chose Citi because I felt I did enjoy the banking space in terms of what I understood about it. And I thought, okay, let's give it a go. I wouldn't necessarily say I woke up saying I want to have a career in banking. I just thought, let's see how it works. If it doesn't work, I'll try something else. And here I am 25 years later. I think I'll highlight three things. One is because the challenges were also sort of like the highlights, right? And the first thing was understanding stakeholder management. And I say that because coming into an environment where with the graduate management program, I went through different areas, so different, over an 18-month period, different countries, different units, different departments, and each area had its own objective, had its own style, had its own leadership. So understanding how to navigate that terrain very quickly, because each period had a specific assignment for a particular period and things that had to be achieved. And honestly, not everybody was necessarily willing to support in achieving that because they're doing their own thing. They had their own jobs, and this person is coming in and saying, okay, I have a program, I have this thing I need to do. So understanding very quickly how to navigate, stakeholders, how to manage stakeholders, how to be adaptable, again, because going through different areas, it's different if you start, typically when someone's career starts, you go to a department or an area and you're there for a while. But when you're crisscrossing over a relatively short period of time, I had to learn very quickly how to adapt to different business styles, how to adapt to different leadership styles, because different bosses were different, everybody had their own style. And also how to adapt. And I think that's one of the things that stayed with me the most would probably be tenacity, because not everybody was necessarily supportive, to be very frank. And when you're dealing with people who are not necessarily outwardly confrontational, but more passive aggressive. So there's a tenacity that's required, because at the end of the day, you do have an objective. There are things that have to be achieved, but you have to work with people, around people, or through people, as the case may be. So there's a tenacity. And I think those are three key things that I learned very early on that I would say have stayed with me throughout my career. So those challenges actually were the highlights, I would say. I think the future is really bright. And I say that because when I look at um, Africa as a whole, there's a lot of friction. Nigeria specifically, there's a lot of friction. And when I look at the digital space for SMEs and corporates, solutions come with this friction, right? And when you look at the space in Nigeria in particular, where we have a very young population, which I think is a blessing, right? So about 40% of the population is between the age of 0 to 45, so that tells us it's quite young and still growing, And so what that tells me is that there's a generation or generations of people that are growing that don't like stress, that haven't grown up with this is how we've been doing things. They are digital natives, right? They were born with mobile phones, like I said, with this thing in their hands, right? And so when they're things that maybe I may have grown up with and learned to live with, the younger generation is just thinking, why? And so there are a lot of questions that have been asked, why? What is friction? Why? What can be done about it? And there's an open-mindedness about that. And so because of that, when I look at the areas specifically around financial inclusion, right? Because when you look at SMEs and corporates, what are they doing? They're providing services or products, and not for themselves typically, but usually for the end person. So which means whoever it is that they're providing the service to or the product to needs to be able to make a payment, receive the solution, receive the product, receive the service, use it effectively, recommend others, and then keep coming back. So there's payments in there, there's transactions in there, there's logistics in there, there's customer service, there's value chain management. There's so much that's going on around that space. And what I see happening in Nigeria is because there's so many inquisitive minds who have access to technology now, because technology has somewhat been democratized, I would say, they're quite keen to solve those problems. And I see, folks who are saying to themselves, okay, so why is this there? Okay, so I have products in Jos, for example, and I have buyers in Kano. How do I move things from Jos to Kano very easily? Right? How do I do things in a quick way? And there's also what I've also seen is that because of the platform mentality, people also want to create, aggregate solutions. And I see that a lot. There's a lot more collaboration. I think growing up, I don't know how old you are, but growing up, a lot of our parents' businesses were one-man shows, right? And so once something happens to that one individual, the person's gone. But I see generations now crowdfunding, solutioning things together. And so there's a lot more collaboration, interactiveness, pulling different parts together, right? And so with that, I'm very, very, very hopeful. And part of the solution that I've seen people bring up, right, in the space, tailor-made for Nigeria. And I say that because by virtue of what I've done over the last few years, I've had, different people, solution providers flying in from different parts of the world, trying to provide solutions that were made for Europe, made for China, made for UAE, and try to force feed it, within the Nigerian context. And it doesn't always work. But if you have something that was built by Nigerians, since we're talking about Nigeria now, built by Nigerians for Nigerians, there's already certain things that are inbuilt in there. That they understand the nuances, the way the average Nigerian works. So that's a very long answer, but my perspective is one of that is quite hopeful. I think it's a positive thing that's happening, and I do expect to see many more solutions that are going to come up from within the country and possibly be exported, as opposed to what has happened historically, where we're constantly importing solutions and technology. I think banks and technology institutions should look at themselves as platforms. Now, platforms for what? Platform for expression. Because the average startup requires what? Many startups say if you ask an average startup what do you require, they'll tell you funding. But funding is not necessarily the be all and end all. Yes, at a point in time, funding will be required. But more often than not, what is required is capacity building. What is required is business mentorship. What is required is access to customers. What is required is technology services, localized technology services, right? Because I may have a fantastic idea, but not have the financial wherewithal to maybe pay Amazon Web Services or, build my own technology stack and all these areas. Now, where banks can come in is that banks already have this. By virtue of the size, banks have customers. That speaks to access to customers, right? Banks have expertise in different areas, which speaks to capacity building. So there's certain things that the fact that I have an idea doesn't mean I know how to run a business. So the banks can provide advisory services within that area. Banks can also provide the networking opportunities, right, to meet with either funders, other founders, or potential customers, right, to create the market. So it's access to network. Funding will come at some point in time, yes. But the truth of the matter is that what I see with a lot of startups, they're not yet bank fundable. Not that they're not fundable, but they're not bank fundable because of the requirements for a financial institution, right? They may not necessarily be there at that point in time, but there are other avenues of funding that they can access, right? Where the banks can help get them there. And also when it comes to technology, by virtue of the fact that banks have invested so much, in technology already, and by virtue of the size and regulations we have to invest in technology, it's actually possible to democratize that somewhat and make some of that technology available. So for instance, now, whilst at FCMB, I've created the co-working space called Hub One, right, to deal with that in terms of having a place where there's capacity building being provided for technology startups, access to networks, and then banking as a service, which basically is making APIs available to startups, to outside of the bank customers, right? What that means is that the average startup can test the APIs and test, that's for transactions specifically now, can test these APIs, can test, what type of services they require, for their own businesses and see this is what works and what doesn't work, as opposed to having to invest in a whole other technology stack, which can consume so much money because it is expensive to do this. And even if they have the funds, they might not necessarily have the expertise. As I said, it's not always about funding. It's about putting the money in the right place. So as I said, banks, I think, will play a good role in providing a platform that gives access for growth. Funding is just a part, a critical part, but not the only thing, just a part of what banks can provide. Now, one of the things, and this is quite, something I'm quite passionate about. If you look at the funding gap with female founders in Africa, in the world, so it's a global issue, number one. By the time you now bring it down to Africa, there's a significant funding gap, right? Where the average female founder receives, on average, about 2% of total funding that has come to Africa, right? So different reports that I've read, whether it's from MasterCard, Partech, all the different areas. By the time I aggregate all the percentages, I haven't seen anything that's come to more than 2% of the total funding that comes to Africa that's gone to female-founded, female-led technology businesses. And so the question is why? I mean, that's the first thing that will come to someone's mind. Why is that, right? And one of the things I've seen that is almost like a catch-22 because so few females are receiving the funding, fewer females are showing up. If you're not showing up, you're not getting the funding. If you're not getting the funding, you're not showing up. It's like a catch-22, right? As a vicious circle that keeps going round and round. And so one of the advices, the first advice I'll give is, first of all, show up, right? Show up. If you have an idea, and I think within the African context, it's encouraging the females to be able to show up because there is, and it depends on which part of the world you're in. If you go to North America, I would say you'll see a lot more female-funded or female-founded businesses because they're actively encouraged to speak up, show up, and active participation in STEM, right? In the US and Europe and areas. So, and that is just sort of starting here in our part of the world. So showing up, actively participating in STEM, which means we're starting not just from the founder level, we're actually going back to education. So going to educational programs and making sure that there's an intentionality in making STEM programs available to females. So not even at university level, I think that's even too far, right down from primary school to secondary school. So you're starting grassroots, as it were. So this is now like a 20, 30-year plan, right? Yes, we'll have the few 5 and 10s and 20s and 100s I'll be showing up now. But if you want to get to the hundreds and the thousands and the hundreds of thousands, I have to go back. I know that, look, STEM is not difficult. There's a tendency to say, oh, let the girls do the softer course. I sort of subliminally encourage to do softer things. But if she wants to study engineering, why not? If she wants to study mathematics, why not? If she wants to study the sciences, core sciences, why not? And being encouraged to say that. That's one. Two is seek out, as much as possible, those who have done it before. Now, because there are not that many, may be a bit of a challenge, but seek out those who have done it before, because when you have someone in front of you, saying, okay, it's not rocket science. I've seen this lady, she doesn't have 2 heads, she doesn't have 9 noses. She's a human, living, breathing human, right? So if she can do it, why can't I, right? And those examples, finding those examples, they may be few, but they are there. And if you cannot find a female, then find a male who is supported. So it's really not about the gender. It helps when it's the similar gender, because then it's easier to relate. But finding those who will be supportive to say, you know what, here's my idea, here's my dream, here's what I want to do, and get the support for it regardless of gender. So show up is what I would say. Show up and have a right network. By network, I mean, again, not funding network. I'm not even talking about money yet, but people who are willing to help you actualize your dream. Willing to help you make it come to life. Then we'll figure out what those details are that are required, for what making it come to life looks like for you. Number one, I would say is that mentorship is critical. It's critical. If I were to put on my rising tide hat now, and by the time I look at different pitches that we see, right? And even outside of rising tide, so I've been a judge in several pitch events, I've sat on investment committees where different people have brought investment opportunities, right? And if I were to look at the way a female, the average, I'm speaking in averages now, the average female presents pitches a business and the way the average male presents the business, there's a difference. So there's a mentorship that's required in terms of even understanding how do you pitch, right? How do you read the room? What are the things that need to be said? So business mentorship is critical. Seeking mentorship on a personal basis and then a mentor for the business. Because I know many times when people talk about mentorship, they talk about personal goals and all, which is important, but a business mentor is critical because that person can help you look at your business, help you dissect it and say, here, and here are the things perhaps you want to pay attention to. Because the whole idea is to make your business investable. And at startup level, people are looking to the individual first, right? We're looking at the individuals, be it the funders, the founders or the team, whoever it is. You're looking at the individuals first. So what is the capacity? How is this team an investable team? So that mentorship is important. Next is the access to the networks. So you're investable, but who's going to invest in you? Who actually knows? There's no point having the best solution that nobody knows about, right? So access to networks. Again, this is where business mentor can come in, can be used to say, look, I'm opening up my network to this product, to this service provider, because there's some level of trust in the character, there's some level of trust in the service, some level of trust. At early stage, you may not fully be able to quantify what the service can do. So, which is why I said what I realized that for startups, they're trusting more on the character of the team, trusting that they will deliver because they may not necessarily have received the opportunity, to deliver at scale. But from the little you've seen they've done, they can do what they're supposed to do. So access to networks, start small if you can. Many times I see people want to expect there's this whole unicorn phenomenon. Everyone's like, oh, everyone wants to be a unicorn. And I said, look at the world of startups. The unicorns are about 1%, and that's globally. It's not even an African thing. It's like 1%. So what happens to the other 99? Right? They're not doing badly, but they're not necessarily be. So if you just come in with a unicorn mindset, you're not thinking about growing a sustainable business. And what will last is a sustainable business. We've seen unicorns that have failed. Look at 5 years ago, some unicorns that were there made so much noise, raised billions and billions of dollars, don't even exist today. We didn't think was possible, but we're seeing it. Okay, which is sort of what's led to the funding winter, but I'm sort of, going to a different conversation now. So business mentorship, I would say access to networks. And from access to network, there's also education, knowing how to do your business and knowing how, having an idea. You could be, you're the subject matter expert in your idea, does not necessarily mean you know how to run a business. Does not necessarily mean you understand the fundamentals of what running a business looks like. So some education is required in that area. Something as seemingly basic as bookkeeping, because I see a lot of people get caught up in the tech of it, especially the technology solution. Oh, the tech can do this, that, and the other. We can do this, we press this and that. We're using AI, we're using all these things. Fine, fantastic, great. But how are you going to run the business of it? How are you managing your OPEX? How are you tackling your cost of goods? How are you going to keep your costs down? How are you going to keep your revenues up? Because early stages, the only thing you can manage is your cost because you're still trying to build your revenue base, right? How are you tracking? Because if you're going to be investable, people need to be able to see the numbers. Are you tracking your numbers? How are you tracking your numbers? So education is very, very important. So I mentioned the mentorship aspect, access to networks, and then education. I think it's only after that you can now start talking about capital raising. And by that, I mean the funding, because that you've now laid a foundation for sustainable funding where people will put their money in, they'll see the results are coming out, and then, okay, it's easier to have a conversation to do, a subsequent round to get more funding. Women are catalysts for change. That's clear to me. Women are catalysts for change. And so if you're empowering a catalyst, then it doesn't stop with the individual. It affects everything around them. So once you're funding a woman, right? Once a woman is financially empowered, whether it's a business owner, whether it's an employee, whatever the case may be, right? Once someone is financially empowered, then what you've done is that you've created change, you've catalyzed the society. If the person is in the family structure, the neighborhood structure, what you'll see is that the folks around that individual will also gain financial awareness because they will automatically instill it in others. we do very well at referrals. If I know something, you'll tell something. You tell somebody, this is what I know. Because people ask, how are you doing this thing? This is what I'm doing. This is how I'm doing it. Women like to knowledge share. There's a lot of sharing knowledge, sharing expertise. It's okay, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm doing. We think about it. Someone asks, oh, where did you do your hair? Oh, I did it here. So how are you doing this thing? This is how I'm doing it. This is what I'm using, and so on and so forth. And then there's now a domino effect, right? So when you financially empower a woman, you have changed the society. You have changed that person's immediate network, immediate environment, and then the more people you empower, then it's the spread. So there's a domino effect, right? So that is why I think it's important. And also it's generational as well. I'm very interested in transgenerational opportunities. Once you're empowering the woman, if the person's the family structure, then more often than not, that's going to feed into the next generation. So you're now creating generations of financially literate individuals, male and female. Read a lot, be an ever learning student. I'm a lifelong student of everything. I'm a lifelong student. So I never assume that I know everything. I ask a lot of questions. I ask questions from my team members. I read a lot. I subscribe to a lot of journals, different areas. I'm part of a lot of networks as well of diverse minded people, right? So it helps me get different perspective, you know. I deal a lot with younger people as well, and in dealing with younger people, they bring a whole different perspective, right? And how to do things, you know. So they think differently. They just think, and that forces me to think differently as well. So it's staying connected, reading a lot, sharing a lot, mentoring. In mentoring, I'm also being mentored, you know, because as we're changing, because the bridge is both ways, communication is both ways. So I share a perspective, I hear their perspective, like, oh, okay, I didn't think about it that way. So it's a two-way thing. So mentorship is not just for the mentee. I think the mentor also gains, you know, quite a lot as well. So I would say that's how I go about it. I'll say this upfront, balance is a myth. There's no such thing as balance. The question is, what's the focus for the season? You know, what am I? So the focus changes each time. There's some periods where things are super hectic because there's a particular focus. I realize you can't give two, three things 100% at the same time. It's just not possible. What is the thing for now? So for instance, now, if there's a particular period where it's really hectic for my professional life, some other things may need to take a back seat. But once things cool down, then I can now bring that back to the fore because they are all important. The key thing is identifying the goals. What are my key goals? What are the things that are important to me? And so there's certain things that are always in my line of vision, as it were. Now, that line of vision in terms of what is my focal point at a point in time may change, right? But they're all in my line of vision. So, but now I'm looking at this for now. When I'm done with this, then I can move to different things. Yes, women multitask, and then many things I can do at different times. But in terms of the focus, right? There are times where it's okay, I'm done with work. This is family time now. This is the time. Phone is off, technology is off. I'm focusing on the family. I'm focusing on self. Another time I can tell family, okay, I'm going to be real busy over this period. So you are not going to see me for a little while. So it's about the focus for the season. Balance. I used to think there's, oh, what am I doing? Why is it there's no balance? It's what is the focus for the season? You know, that's what I found works for me. I'd like my legacy to be known as being a significant known for creating, right, impactful platforms, significantly impactful platforms. What do I mean by that? Creating platforms that have added value, right, to lives, to businesses. So I can point to, okay, because of my impact, right, because of whatever platform I've created, whether it's for funding, whether it's for education, whether it's for mentorship, whatever it may be, or access a network, I can point to 4, 5, 6, 7, 20 companies that exist. I can point to 5, 10, 15, you know, people who are now mentoring others because I mentored them. I can point to. So I look back and my legacy is not in the numbers, but is in the people, is in the lives. You know, that for me, that's the real legacy. And not just lives that I've impacted, but I'm seeing them impact others. That is what I like to see. That's what my legacy will be. Have a goal. Be clear what it is you want. because success means different things to different people. For some people, being successful is being the CEO. For someone, being successful is in terms of dollars and cents and financial remuneration. But whatever the goal is, there's no right or wrong, but be clear, crystal clear on what your goal is. That's number one. Number two, be patient with yourself. Be patient because you're playing the long game, right? So it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. So in this, even though you have a goal, there'll be different milestones. So you're tracking and it's okay. Am I meeting my milestones? I may not be, if I've given myself 6 months, okay, I may not be where I wanted to be in 6 months' time, but am I making progress? But you're tracking against your progress, right? Not necessarily against a specific timeline, but making sure there's a progress, they're making progress. Be patient with yourself. Be patient with yourself because it's very easy to beat yourself up and say, oh, I thought I'll be blah, blah, blah by this time. No, be patient. Life is not linear. Many times when we draw our plans and our lives, right, we draw our own personal graph and we think it's going to go like that straight. But usually it's like that, it goes up and down, has twists and turns because that is life. So be patient with yourself. Life is not linear, but be tenacious because you have to keep going. And most importantly, be authentically yourself. Don't copy and paste someone else. What works for someone else is what works for them. What works for you is what works for you, what you are designed for. So I always believe that everyone's challenges are uniquely designed for them. I can deal with my challenges. I can't deal with someone else's. I can deal with mine, right? So be authentically yourself. Be you, do you, the best. The world will align with who you are. Don't try and be someone else. Be you, do you, and be the best version of you could possibly be. That would be my advice.